Okay. So the idea is, we have Prefect. Prefect is kind of like hitting this external API. So that'd be like a request.get, right? And then we would take the data, coerce it, and then store it in S3. And we'll run this on a schedule with Prefect. So this will be like our Prefect component. All right. And this part, of course, is like our data lake. Right. If you look at the actual code, it's a little more complicated than this. Right. Like one of the main things that we have to do, is make sure that we are not repeatedly loading the same data again and again and again, as we kind of hit an external API. So to do that, actually, we first query Athena, and we query our data lake and say, okay, do we already have a record? This is with our Texas receipt data. So really what we do is before making the request, we basically say, okay, do we already have data from this restaurant? If we have data from this restaurant, when was the last date? And then when we make a query, we say we can specify in the API to get data after that last date. Okay? And then send that data to our data lake. All right, and we do that with AWS Wrangler. So this is our orchestrator, or our workflow manager. And then this part is our data lake, right? And the next step, because we're not really transforming the data too much here, it's just like a Parquet file. So the next step is to then transform it, right? And that's dbt. Okay? So what's kind of nice, what we're going to do is, normally we did not just go directly from S3 to dbt. We went from S3 to Postgres or some sort of database into dbt. But what I've been learning from some of you is that it's now popular to skip the database altogether. And the benefit of this is, well, you get the benefits of a data lake, meaning it's cheap, right? Because you're just storing static S3 files. It takes different forms of data, right? It doesn't have to be too cleaned up, right? And we don't have to create tables beforehand. We can just directly query the data. So PySpark, right, was an example of this. And you can actually connect dbt to PySpark so that when you write your SQL queries, it's actually using a PySpark cluster to do this. In this case, we'll be using a technology called DuckDB, which is the easiest way I can describe it is it's like PySpark, meaning it's in-memory database. However, PySpark is designed to run on a cluster of computers, right? More than one computer, and divide up the tasks, partition the data, and then divide up the tasks across that cluster. With DuckDB, it's designed to run on just one computer. Okay? So that's DuckDB. Why is this becoming more and more popular? Because people are realizing, okay, our data sets are the data sets do not require a cluster of computers. And the reasons for that, we can do it all on one node, meaning one computer. And there's two reasons for this. One is the data sets are not so large that you require multiple. So it's you have the medium-sized data sets, meaning, I don't know, under 100 gigs, something like that. I probably should look up exactly that number. So you are working with medium-sized data sets. And the other reason is because you can get more and more hardware onto just one computer. Okay, so you can rent, an AWS machine that has 130 gigs of just memory if you're doing in-memory processing, right? And then also has a terabyte of storage or more. Okay. So in that case, it's like, why do we need to pay for a cluster? And also the complications. It's, to working with PySpark. Or PySpark jobs fail more often than, let's say, like something that just runs on a single computer. So you can hook PySpark up to DBT, or you can hook DuckDB, which, like we said, is kind of like PySpark, but just runs on one computer. But either way, we're storing our data on a data lake, and then what we'll do is repeatedly transform the data. Remember, through staging. This is our source data. Let's put it here. This is our source data. Sorry about that. Hold on. So this is our source data is like S3. Then we have our staging data. We're staging in DBT. And then finally we have like our marks. We have our integration where we combine the data from different sets. In this case, we just have one data set, but you can imagine for our Texas revenue data, like what I would do is combine it with stock price data to see, as we pull down information from Chipotle, etc., Applebee's, or I think we also do like Cheesecake Factory, see how predictive that is of either revenue, right? And then go from there. So source data, staging, integration, where we merge multiple data sets, and then finally the marts, right? And then these marts connect to, right? So these will be our star schema, right? Where's the fact table? So you can imagine this is my receipts table, and then we have like a time dimension, and then we have, what's the name of the restaurant, and probably some location dimension over here. And this connects to a data dashboard, right? Meaning either Tableau or what I would prefer, probably, to be honest, is like Flask, Streamlit. Okay? So this is our pipeline that I'm proposing that you all build for a project. Cool. Okay. So where we are is here with with Prefect, and we're about to get into like DBT. Go ahead, William.
So one thing about DuckDB is you don't have to save the database in its own like database file. So in terms of using it with DBT, uh, how does that work?
Yes, it's pretty cool. So we can pull the data from S3 with DBT, and then we can store the transformation, like each of these transformations, in Parquet files on S3 in a separate folder. Okay? Then
Very
if you,
cool.
yeah, very cool, exactly. And then, if you wanted to,
Okay.
yeah, I was going to say, then if you wanted to, you probably could even connect directly to the data lake to hook that up to Flask. I haven't done that yet, so I don't know the details. Go ahead, William.
Okay. Also, there are open source tools like Delta Lake and Iceberg. Delta Lake's more popular, but they basically allow kind of a data warehouse interface when you're dealing with data lakes on S3. So they manage all of like basically they manage schema like you would in a data warehouse, except it's just S3 behind the scenes. Do you know if DBT can work with either of those, or if
There,
it only works?
there's a glue. What I've seen is there's DuckDBT, which then has like a glue extension, which serves as your data catalog.
Okay. All right,
And
thank you.
yeah, those are excellent questions. So, what you're kind of identifying, and it's in one of the readings too. I put a blog post. So, what you're kind of like pointing out is like the main components of a data pipeline. Um, let me let me clear this for now. So, I think I'll get it right. We'll see. So, the main components uh, is this like ETL, like to a data lake, right? So that's our workflow manager, right? Prefect, Airflow, Dagster. Okay. So this is, our ETL basically to a data lake, but it's very light transformations, right? And we know the reasons for that is so that we can just, we can have as much of the raw data as possible. So that links to our data lake. So that's S3, and that's our data lake. Then you have like the real transformation layer, which is, our DBT part. So that's our transformation layer. Now, and this is, transforming, but storing kind of along the way here. And now this part here is like your catalog, right? And that's like Glue, Delta Lake, probably. I'm not familiar with them, to be honest, but like Delta Lake, Iceberg, I'm guessing are similar types of things the way I'm hearing them. Where what our data catalog does is this way we actually know, you can manage, well, who's allowed to have access, who in the organization can have access to these different files, what's in these different files, things like that feel like a database. So that's, for us, that's Glue, right? This is DBT, right? And then finally, this leads to like the Mart/dashboard, right? This is our dashboard, okay? Which somehow is going to query the final data mart. The other thing that then you can like hook into this, of course, is like, like ML model, kind of your data scientists obviously would access this data lake, things like that. And what we'll do, all this is in, I think really, I think different organizations have different models for it, but for your project and probably in real life too, it would be good to have this all in one code base. Meaning DBT, we have this prefect code base. Let me stop sharing. So we have this like prefect code base where you can see all of it, this revenue tracker, and here you can see we have the Athena ETL, and what I'm proposing is like you have another folder for your DBT code base, which will be DBT core, which is what we'll get into now. All right, so it's like, we have something to query Athena, we have our ETL, and then you have a DBT code base. Okay. Questions about, I guess, like the architecture? No. And you should be able to like justify this, like why are we doing this architecture, right? The data lake, right? It's like we said, it's cheaper. You're storing raw data. One other thing I like about it, which is nice, is that you're not storing like the same, say we have a database here. Well, now you're storing the same data twice, It's like, what is the data of record here? Like what is kind of like the true data. Remember, we always talk about like single source of truth with the database. So as you duplicate things, it's hard, and these things get out of sync, right? Like it's hard to know who you should rely on. It also means you might have to then, you'll just naturally probably start duplicating that logic, right? All that testing the data, validating the data, you probably will start seeing the same types of tests being written for your data lake as is written for your data warehouse. That's what I think could happen. So that would be another justification for maybe just getting rid of this altogether if you can, right? And just using the data lake. I'm sure people have I'm sure there are counter arguments for why not to do this, but this would be the case for it. All right. So in terms of, let's get started with DBT core, if I can. So what you can see in this requirements.txt is, it's just DBT core library and then this DBT Postgres library. So we'll start with DBT Postgres because it's just like slightly easier to get started. And then, we can just pip3 install -r the requirements.txt. And this will install the related dependencies along with DBT. At that point, you can do like DBT and start to see probably the different commands. The one we want is dbt init. Oops. And this will, as you can see, we don't have any code base here. This will initialize a code base. So we'll do dbt init, and I think I need the project name. So we'll call this like Texas revenue, or we'll call it dbt Texas revenue. All right. Okay. Now this has already, believe it or not, like initialized our repository. But now what it's doing is it's saying, what database do we want to use? It has different options. All right. What we want to do is not use, we're going to do this manually. We're not going to use this kind of like wizard, like interact, whatever. We're going to press Control C. And you can see here we have the dbt Texas revenue. The logs are outside of the code base. You can imagine like storing these on S3. And then here's our Texas revenue. And this is the dbt code base, right? For setting it up, the most important one is this dbt project.yaml, okay? So you can see this is the name of our project. This is the version of the code base, of the dbt code base that we're working with. So we can we can bump this up as you change the code, for example. This is the config version. This you wouldn't really change. This is like, basically the API version of dbt that you're using, so this you're going to keep the same. And then this profile thing is kind of most important. So you can see it says this setting configures which profile dbt uses for this project. All right. So your profile is a separate file that will keep all of your connection information, meaning as you run dbt, what is the database, what is the connection to the database and where is that information? So for that, that's not stored in your project, okay? When you install dbt, in your home directory, if you do like ls-a, you'll see a .dbt folder, and then you can cd into that. And here's our profile, profiles.yaml. So just code .that. Okay, so I already have this, but this actually won't work. This will not connect to this one because what I need is this word right here to line up to this top thing right here. All right, so this is saying I'm going to use the dbt Texas revenue profile. I could have named something. I could have called this Postgres and called this Postgres. And now you can see in the profiles.yaml, all the rest of the information is basically the same, right? It's in the reading. You can basically use this. So target dev, that says when you write to dbt, it's going to be writing to this output, right? This profile will write to this output. You can have multiple here, I believe. Maybe not. But anyway, we'll write to this output. And now here's my adapter type is Postgres. The host is localhost, right? You can imagine with RDS, this host would be the AWS machine. The user, right? My password, I don't have a password in my database. So you need to have an empty string here if you don't have a password. The port, the DB name, so you'll have to create this database. Let's probably do a different one. PSQL -L. We'll call it, you can see I have this DBT test. We'll do create database DBT revenue. All right, and then we'll put that here. And then, oopsies. All right, the schema, remember when you write to DBT, you oftentimes don't want to write, say this was a RDS or Redshift, you wouldn't want to write to the main schema. You want to write to your personal one until you're ready to have this in production, right? Because you're working on this in development. So that's the schema that this will write to. The threads is the number of database threads. So 1 is fine. Connection timeout is if it gets stuck, when do you want it to give up? All right. At that point, let's go back to this DBT revenue. And the next thing we can do is actually just for the purpose of an example, we can seed our database, okay? So if you look at the cities, this just literally has cities, population, latitude, and longitude, all right? It's a CSV file. We can move this cities file into DBT Texas revenue seeds, all right, and go into DBT Texas revenue. And now all you have to do is type DBT seed, I hope. Let's see what happens. Okay, look, registered adapter 1.63. Great. Unable to do parsing. I don't know what that means. Target dev, but it says complete successfully, and it says start a seed file JK test cities. This is my schema name cities. Loaded seed file JK test cities. Inserted 1,000 records. So this will have this will have the table in my Postgres database. Yeah, go ahead, William.
Sorry, so you're still using Postgres, you're not using DuckDB at this point.
Right now, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, we're using Postgres. Cool. So now if we go to PSQL, we should be able to go to, I forget what I called it. Well, look. DBT Texas revenue. Let's go to my profiles.yaml file. It's called DBT revenue. So let's connect to that. DBT revenue. And now select all from whatever was called my schema name dot cities. So it's just getting the and there they are. Okay. So this has connected to my database. You can also confirm that if you do DBT debug is like a way to like kind of go make sure this is working. So you can see here, you know, I don't know, it's checking the version, it found the profiles, it's going through a little checklist, and then here's the connection information, and it's confirming that it can actually connect to Postgres at this point. Okay? And then the only other thing to tell you is that if you probably need to specify, this is specifying the output, right? This is specifying where data is being written from. But oftentimes your source data like lives somewhere else. So how do you handle that? You know, as you create, let's go here. CD models. Let's remove the example and then make directory for staging, and then touch staging. Let's call it like stage cities SQL. No, not just stage cities.sql. Okay, and now let's change. What I want to do actually is like we need a profiles.yaml file, not profiles.yaml, sources.yaml. And the whole point of this is that the output, like the input data, say that's on like S3 or say that's in like a common database, right? Like on production or something like that, is going to be different than the output. So the output data is here, right? Like when I run a model, it's going to be written to here, and that way it's not affecting any of the production models. But where is the input data coming from? Where is the source data coming from? That you specify in the sources file, which we've seen before. And I probably will have to copy this because I can't remember exactly the format. But it's here in the reading. Okay, dev. Okay, version 2, database, Postgres. Yeah, so this is my sources. And so just to remind you about this. Okay, so this is my input data, right? Like this is the source that I'm reading from. And this is just like the version of the API I'm using. Then we use sources. Then I name it, specify the database. This should be not that. It should be DBT revenue is the database name I'm using. And then where's the source of the data? In this case, it is in, sorry about that. This is getting confusing. It's in my, it's in JK test. So the input is here, and this is the name of the table. So this specifies the input data. If I want to write to like a separate output, which is normally what you want to do, let's call this JK output test. All right. So now this will write to here. but we'll read it in from here, from this. So that means when we go to stage cities, it will be something like with cities as, I probably need to copy this too, I apologize. There we go, it's not so hard. Okay. All right, so this source right here, right, this is our Jinja. This source is reading from here. So its source is Postgres cities, and that points to this database, this schema, right? And then the output of it will be here if we run the model. So we'll run here. Let's do select all from stage cities. Let's just do like limit 5, I guess. That way you can see that it's reading from this input. This has all the data. It lives on this JK test, and then the output is determined by my profiles.yaml that lives in JK output test. And now you can do dbt, I probably should cd out, dbt run. Okay, and it completed successfully. And notice this, that the output, right, the output is this JK output test that's determined by the profiles.yaml. And the input data is, like we said, determined by the source. So that's here. That's the input data. So now if I navigate over to PSQL and go to the DBT revenue and look, there should be, it's hard to see the tables because of the schema, because it's not on the public schema. But we can, this is my output data. Sorry, this is my output data. So if I do select all from JK output test.cities, this should semicolon. Did I work it? Let me see. What did it say existed? JK output test.cities. It did say that it existed. Select all from JK output cities. Is it cities dot? No, it should be this. I don't know why. Oh man. Well, it was going so well, guys. I'm not quite sure why this is wrong. So let me do dbt run again. Okay, stage cities. That's right. Because the name of the table, as we know, is taken by this file. Okay? So if you forget, you can just do what I did and look at the output. So now let's take a look at this again. Select all from this. And notice, even though I'm selecting all, there's only 5 results because that's what we said our output should be. Whereas the input data, JK output test.cities, select all from JK output test.cities, right? This, from the input data is determined by the sources. I'm confusing myself. Is determined by the sources. That's JK test. Okay, so this has all the data. So what's the point? Why did we go over that? I just want you to be clear that like the profiles.yaml file determines the output data, right? And you can remember that because it says the word output. So this is where the data is written to. But the source of the data, where you're reading from, right, where like the data pipeline is starting and getting its data, that can be something else, and that's determined from the sources file. Okay. The DuckDB part is really interesting. I think I'm gonna I'll deploy all of it, so you'll be able to go through the DuckDBT. If you want to just jump ahead to that, you can. But I recommend, especially for those of you who haven't seen it yet, do the DBT core setup, play around with DuckDB a little bit, and then this reading walks you through how to set up DuckDBT. Like I said, yeah, you can have it set up and it goes through it in the reading so that you can both read from S3 in a Parquet file and also write to S3 in a separate folder. All right. And essentially what you're messing with is the profile is this, is the profiles.yaml, right? Because this is your connection. So you'll specify here that, okay, you're going to be using like DuckDB, and then in the source data as well, you'll specify actually, like you're going to specify here that this is coming from S3, all right? So like your source data is coming from the data lake, so you're going to specify that here, okay? All right, let me deploy this so you guys can get moving. Questions about DBT core before I put you into breakout rooms. Beautiful.
So if you had selected that option to do Postgres without doing it manually, would it have set up a lot of this automatically?
It would try, but yeah, but then you want to change stuff. Yeah, I mean, like, so it will hopefully set it up automatically, but this is all the magic it's doing under the hood, right? So you want to kind of know and be able to debug this and change. Like, we're going to add to this, etc. As we go. Cool. What I did was in we have this DuckDB tutorial lesson where essentially here's the repo, right? And like the whole setup is just to type, for at least on a Mac, is to do brew install DuckDB. And then from there, what I did is you can navigate. Maybe it doesn't show it. Let's just go here. You can navigate to this Netflix playground.sql file. And what I also did was, because it said to do this in the tutorial, was if you go to code, then settings, then keyboard shortcuts. All right, so it's code, then settings, then keyboard shortcuts. Then this is like, a list of your keyboard shortcuts. Like you do this, it will do the following or whatever. So you can add your own custom ones. I think I did that by clicking here. Nope. Let's try that. Okay. So I clicked on this button, right? And now I pasted in the one that they said, which is when you press Shift Return, kind of call the terminal with the selected text. Okay. So I just copied and pasted what I saw in the tutorial. And again, the way I did that was code, settings, keyboard shortcuts, and then I clicked on this thing, which took me to keybindings.json, which is where you can define these. So now what's nice about this is I can just like press Shift Return. Now I have to be inside DuckDB, right? If I do this is not a bash command, so it's going to break. But I can do like DuckDB. Oops, if I can spell it right. All right, and now go here and press Shift Return. And then, and install these libraries. So what is this for? The HTTPFS, this just like allows you to connect, I think, to S3. And then this is like some setup that we need, right? I'm just reading the tutorial. To then say, okay, this bucket is in US East 1. And then what's nice here is you can, use this function, read Parquet. Here's a link to the Parquet file, right? That I guess DuckDB has available, and then create a table as that. And now that I think now we can do select all from the Netflix, limit 3. Just treat it like a regular database, and it displays. Okay, this is the main thing. This from Netflix is just a shortcut. Like I guess DuckDB allows you that you don't have to type select all from. You can just do from Netflix, and that will display all of it. Okay, and you can output it. I'm sure it has it in the tutorial that you can like output this to CSV, right, or to Parquet. So that's what you can do. And then this data, this can be saved to a .duckdb file. So just like SQLite, you can kind of think of it like SQLite. Just like SQLite, you can save the database to just like a file. Like same thing here. You can save it save this to like, we can export it to Parquet, but you can also have like a file stored, just like a .SQLite file. Okay. And I'm not. Let's see. Oh, and then how to get out of this? You just press Control C, like until you're finally out of it. I don't know if I have. Oh, there. So for instance, I have this .duckdb database, and if I wanted to open that up, I would just do duckdb, dbt, and then the name of the database, dbt.duckdb. Okay. And then I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the interface for how to explore this. But, I could look at the table and just write the queries. Okay, so you can move through the interface. I'm still getting familiar with this technology. But the next thing, the real way that we'll work with it is with DBT. So let's see if we can do that. I'll go back to my terminal. Over here, we'll go to Notes. Actually, what we should do, and we can also look at the DuckDB GitHub repo, because it tells us how to get started. Oh, sorry, DuckDBT GitHub repo. Do not have it? It's all right. The only thing I needed to know how to do was to do pip3 install duckdbt. I think that's right. Okay, so here we're installing the duckdbt package. It's like a plugin, essentially. So I might have, you can see I have this conflict, which is because I'm like skipping steps. So what I should do really is first define a Python environment. So it'll be Python 3, sorry about this, -m venv, right? I'm just defining a Python environment, and then I'm going to say like, hey, all my pip libraries should be stored in the venv library, the venv folder. Okay, so this will create a folder called venv, which you can see here, and now we need to activate it. Notice you would see it activated if you'd see something here. Let's see, source venv bin activate. All right, so I think I might already have been inside a thing, an environment. It's okay. So now let's do pip3 install duckdbt, and I think, yeah, this time we don't have a conflict, I hope. Cool. So because at this point it's installing dbt from scratch, notice it's complaining about my pip version, but it's not complaining that I have a conflict between libraries, because when I do pip3 install duckdbt, that will also install the compatible dbt library. All right. So now I can do, and it's installed inside here. It's stored inside there. So now I can do dbt init, like duckdbt demo, right? So this is my standard dbt init function, right, to create a code base. And then I'll press, enter, and now we're back to this whole thing. Which database would you like to use? Notice that's asking me, do I want to use DuckDB, right? Again, we're going to press Control C here, and instead we'll set up the connection through the .dbt file. So remember, if I go to home, this is your home directory. If you just do like cd tilde, then I'll do ls-a, make sure I have this. I have .dbt, it's here. So let's go to cd.dbt. And then let's do code dot. And now we have our old profile. It's fine to have multiple profiles, but we want a second one, and we want it to line up. And we need to specify like DuckDB. In order to do this, I just followed the documentation, which I also took. Hold on, I have some notes. Let's take a look at my notes. So the documentation tells you that, we'll just copy this. It basically tells you need this, type DuckDB. And then I'll walk through the rest. All right. Now remember this word, let's make sure about this. this word right here, this attribute, this needs to line up with my project. So this is called, really needs to line up with this profile, this attribute right here. So that's duckdbt demo, and this is off, right? So we're calling it duckdbt demo. And now this target is where dbt is going to write the output of its tables, right? Its models to. So the output dev type duckdb. So this is a duckdb database, right? And that's this file. And then here's the path, all right? You don't need this file to already exist. And this path can be anywhere, but you just want to, you want to use your own, obviously, right? Like your own home directory. So you can just cd tilde, type pwd, and then you can have this. And then let's just change it to make it fresh. So we'll do duckdbt demo.duckdb. All right, so now any models I write will be saved, the output will be saved here for now, okay? These extensions, remember we needed this HTTPFS to like read from S3, that read Parquet function that reads from S3. We need this, okay? So that's what this is about. And then I guess this allows us to read Parquet files. Remember, we also, in DuckDB, we also had to specify at least US East 1. The other thing you need to do in DuckDBT, even if it's a public S3 bucket, is specify your access keys. So the way that this is working, this is a DBT function where it's looking at your environmental variable. So you need to have an environmental variable called S3 access key, S3 secret access key. Let's just go through that. So if you go, I hope I'm in AWS still. I think I am. So if you go to AWS and you click on, go to like IAM services, then you just, from there, create a new user. And then you can see I already did one called S3 access. Let's call this my DB S3. And then I think I need this, provide user access to AWS Management Console, specify user. No, we'll create a new one. Wait, do I need this? No, I don't. I'm sorry. I don't need, this is if I want to like log in to AWS like through the web. I don't want that. Okay. Now I want to attach the policies directly and look for S3, Amazon S3 full access. Click on next, and then from there, click on create user. Okay, so now I have this user. Click on it, and then basically what I want to click on from here is security credentials. Why? Because I want to get my access tokens. From there, I can click on create access key, and I think we are, use case command line. It's giving me some warning, DuckDB. Okay, so now these are my access keys, right? I won't show you that one. But all I'll do now is go to my, if you look at the home directory again, you'll see that you have a bash profile, okay? This thing, when you press Command T or open up your terminal, this thing gets run, okay? And in there, you can put in, basically what you want to do is, remember this is going to read from here. So in there, you can just type in export S3 access key equals, and then your access key. And you can put that inside your bash profile. How do you open up your bash profile? You just do code.bash profile. I don't want to, I don't want to really open up mine because I'm afraid I'll forget to deactivate my access keys. But you can just do code.bash profile, and then that will be sufficient. And then you can just copy, that will open up VS Code, and then you can just paste in your access keys in there. You just want to paste in, again, that export, whatever it is, S3 access key ID into there. Then the next thing you need to do is make sure that inside your environment, that has registered, right? Because remember, the bash profile only gets run when you create a new tab or whatever. So what you can do is just do source tilde// dot bash profile, and that will run. You see that it took a second? That's running this file. And so then that should be setting up your, your environmental variables, and you can confirm that by doing something like echo $, whatever it was called, S3 access key, press return. If you see this print out, you know it's there. And then you'll do the same thing with this one right here. So that's what's going to allow you to read from S3. This is, for writing to a specific Duck database on your computer. What's cool is you can actually change this, I believe, to have it live also on S3. This is just a file, like the SQLite file. So you can have, if you want, you can have this also live in an S3 bucket. So that's the output. And this is for reading in S3 data, the settings. That's probably the hardest part. Now, from there, what we'll want to do, the other thing we'll want to do is basically read in some data. Let's go here to the DuckDBT demo, the models, and we'll remove this file. And then we'll just make a directory for staging, and then touch staging. We need a sources.yaml file and touch staging. What is it? Tracks. Let's call it stage tracks.yaml. And now that should be here. All right. I'm going to copy some of this code. So what we're going to do next basically is just query from our source, and then we're going to need to define a source. So this is wrong. This should be a SQL file. Okay. So with tracks as select all from source S3 Netflix, select all from tracks. So remember, this is going to look for something defined in sources, which we haven't defined yet. I think it's right here. It's right here. So let's walk through this. So now this, remember, version 2, this is the version of DBT, essentially, or like their API that we're using. This you don't need to mess with this. The name is S3 Netflix, right? So this is going to correspond to this S3 Netflix. Okay, and now what it's saying is when you access this data set, like your S3 data Netflix, I want you to do the following. So meta, this is, I guess, like some metadata, I guess, but it's just meta, and then external location, and now this is using my DuckDB function. Remember, this is that same read parquet function. So like you can use like a duck, if it was a CSV, it would be read CSV. That's the DuckDB function. It's in quotation marks. That's just the way it is. And then I'm using single quotes to specify the location in S3. All right. So now if you think about what will happen if I do dbt run, it should read the data set from S3, from stage tracks, select all from stage tracks, store stage tracks in the DuckDB database that's defined in my profiles.yaml file. Right? It should store that data here. Okay, let's say that all again. So essentially what should happen is I'm going to do with tracks select all from source S3 Netflix. It's going to see this and go here. S3 Netflix. Follow the instructions, which is to read this file, and then it's going to create a new model in the output, which is specified in my profiles.yaml file over here. So this will be stored in users Jeffrey Katz duckdbt demo.duckdb, right? And that file doesn't currently exist. So now we will go to my code base, and do dbt run and hope. Oh, beautiful. And what does it say? Created a SQL view model main.stageTracks. Okay, so now we can navigate over to my database, which is, right, here's the new one. And just take DuckDB, this thing, and now let's just do the query, essentially. So it told me it was here, and we'll just do select all from semicolon, and there they are. So that's pretty cool, right? Because it, basically we're gonna have a prefect orchestrator store right to Parquet in S3, and then we can have DBT read from it, right, by specifying a source in S3, and then coerce it and save it to this duck DBT document here. Now, probably now you can save it locally. You can also ultimately export a Parquet file to S3. And the way to do that, again, I'll have to look, it's at the very bottom here, is this. So this, normally you use this in DBT to specify if you want a materialized view or a non-materialized view, right? A materialized view is basically a table, right? It's actually writing the table to disk, whereas a view, a non-materialized view, means it looks like a table, but really it's recalculating this query every time. When you see the view StageTracks, it's actually not creating new data there. It's just when you call select all from StageTracks, it's rerunning this query. So normally that's what this kind of this Jinja is for. It's to say, hey, I want to use a materialized view. But in this case, because we have this DuckDB plugin thing, we can do config. This thing should be written to external. And the location, let's call this my Netflix. Okay, tracks.parquet. Let's do 20. Yeah, that's fine. And now this time, if I run this, I think it'll probably be in both locations, both the DuckDBT database locally, as well as in this new file, which, doesn't exist right now, but we'll create it. So let's just do it. Let's just do dbt run. So I have to go over here, type in dbt run. Cannot set a lock file on this. I forget why. What did I do? Oh, you know what? Maybe I cannot do both.
Is it because you have it open on another terminal?
That's probably true. Thank you, Ken. Wonderful done. Okay, let's do this again. Right, so that's actually a pretty good error message, right? It wants to lock the database before writing to it. But this time it worked. Cool. All right, so started a SQL external model, main.stageTracks, right? External model. So now if I go over to S3, and this was written to Jigsaw Lab student Netflix tracks.parquet. So Jigsaw Lab student, and then Netflix track.parquet. All right. And you can see it was just written now, September 26, 2023, whatever time it is. Okay. So that's pretty cool. I would say in terms of how to do this, what I would think is you really just want to write to the Parquet file when you're handing this off to some other stakeholder, right? In other words, for your MART data, right? That's what I'm thinking, because for anyone who can use DuckDB that, they probably should just use that, right? As opposed to create. So in other words, what you probably want to do is store the staging data in DuckDB, and maybe you can do it in, I think in the documentation, it shows how to store it in a DuckDB database on S3. So like kind of stay with there, and then you can think of like your Mart data potentially is almost like a report, like a CSV report that maybe you'd hand off to like a data analyst or whatever, and they can use it, and so they can just then, uh, you know, this is all maybe stored in a folder, right? Like store this data for someone to see, and another team can then just like access this coerced data all the way along. All right. So I still think the main concepts are just like our output data is defined in the profiles.yaml file mainly, and our input data is defined here in the sources.yaml file, except if we want to write this to an external kind of location, meaning S3, then we can do this config materialize external, and now here we're also defining where our output is going to be. All right, so this is defining our output. Our profiles.yaml also is another way to define the output, and then input data is defined in sources.yaml over here. Questions about this? It's pretty laid out in the readings. It was not as painful as I expected to set up. So I think you all can do it, which is great. And I think it's also like pretty modern workflow. So having this, and you don't have to pay for too much either. You're just paying for S3. So there's very little cost to that. And you probably could even query, use DuckDB as your database hooking up to Flask, So you can just query the data lake directly and like query one of these Parquet files in order, for your analytics, right? If you want to do either connect this to Tableau, which we can get to one day, or to probably what's even better is something like a Streamlit, Flask dashboard. And the reading should walk you through this. Cool. All right, so, we did spend all this time just so that you guys can feel comfortable, right? Like watching these and developing a project. And like I said, you don't have to have the project like polished in order to start talking about